My grandmother was a serial arsonist. We're almost certain she burned down several of her own businesses for insurance, but we could never prove it, and she got away with it. That's always been an awkward thing, but I just remembered the other day about one of the fires that happened when I was a kid. She called us to her home for some trivial reason at short notice, then she pointed out a fire in the distance and screamed, "That looks like my store," and was running around calling the fire department, dramatically freaking out. It was her store and I forgot about it in the aftermath, but in remembering I realized that she used us as an alibi. Pyro Granny.
My former uncle left my aunt for their African sponsor child, sponsored her through school and university, and brought her out to visit. She referred to them as Mom and Dad. He moved to the other side of the country to avoid scandal, high ranking at a major hospital. He's now married to her, and they have at least one child.
So your uncle did a Woody Allen. Yuck. My uncle married a gold digger, had a kid with her. Then the gold digger brought over her gold-digging parents to the U.S. along her kids from a previous marriage. The gold-digging MIO was caught on camera telling the gold-digging wife to get as much money from my uncle as she can. Now, my uncle wants a divorce, but the gold-digging wife wants a large sum as part of the divorce settlement. Something about how she wants the house they live in, which my uncle bought years before they met. Ick how divorce settlements work. Now, instead, they're trying to work it out, but ick how you work the fact that the woman you're with doesn't love you, but loves your money. We never really liked her anyway. We all refuse to acknowledge her as aunt unless forced by the other aunts and uncles.
My mom catfished one dude with my pictures for over a year. One day he called me that he arrived in front of my work and I was like, "Who TF are you?" So we went to her house together for explanation. Poor dude. By the way, he was my age.
So, all my life my mom would talk about what a horrible baby I was. And she would talk about how much better of a baby my older sister was. Don't worry, not a trauma dump, this is funny, I promise. So one summer we go to the big family reunion. All the most distant relatives present, etc. Everyone eats and then the kids all go to play, and being non-sporty I just kept sitting around with the adults. My older sister didn't come because she had just gotten married and was off on honeymoon. Anyways, Mom launches in on me, talking about how bad a baby I was, and everyone's just kinda letting her wind herself up about it because that's how she be, and she says how my older sister was such a good baby, and my aunt, drinking heavily, blurts out, "How would you know?" It turned into a whole fight, and eventually someone took me aside and explained that my mom lost custody of my older sister when she was a newborn and didn't get it back until she was 4 or 5. My grandpa, who has dementia, asked why there was cranberry sauce on his pants and if my mother could clean it up. No one made anything with cranberries, he was bleeding from his. To the hospital we went, and he had a massive kidney stone he was trying to push out stuck halfway in his halfway, which also, as you guessed, tore it up and made him bleed. Edit, trying to hit these comments one by one, so sorry for the delay, so we'll just make an edit. It's not that he can't feel pain, he just can't communicate it. When we feel sadness, happiness, anger, etc., we usually communicate whether it's verbal or otherwise. Pain in this case falls under that category and is something we use to communicate what's wrong, but as stated previously, is something he has a hard time doing. My 17-year-old cousin stood up in the middle of dinner and announced he got a girl pregnant and she was keeping the baby. Most people laughed until about 30 awkward seconds went by, and one by one we started realizing that he was in fact serious when he started going into details. My 80-year-old grandma, who hasn't had a drink of alcohol in over a decade, drank wine straight out of the bottle after. My parents' cat chose them after fires took over our state last Thanksgiving. She came to the door and decided she was ours. They tried to find her owner with no luck. Thanksgiving morning this year, cat is missing. My parents are yelling about how she stayed for a year and chose to go back. They're tearing up the house. She had just been to the vet, so they thought maybe she was upset. Hours later they find her in a closet they already looked in. She was cuddled up in some blankets and sleeping. I think she was sore from a vaccine she got. My mom is in tears. My dad won't let the cat's feet touch the floor. She is being carried everywhere and fed treats in his arms. Drama. Edit. Cat tax. We used to have a running joke in my family that my sister belongs to the cable guy because she has blonde hair and nobody else in the family does. The joke started because one time when I was little, our TV stopped working and I suggested my dad should just call the cable guy to fix it. He explains that the cable guy doesn't need to physically come to the house every time, and I said something like, well, he comes over when you're at work. For years we all just assumed that I was remembering one instance where the cable guy came over and my toddler brain ran with it. The joke lived on for years. My sister belongs to the cable guy because he comes over when dad isn't home. Then, 15 years or so later, my parents' marriage comes crashing down because we find out my mom has been cheating on my dad the whole time. Which then begs the question, does my sister belong to the cable guy? Because that just became a non-zero possibility. Why would a 4-year-old say that the cable guy comes over when dad isn't home? Was I really just remembering one instance where it happened, or did my mom actually have friends over and that's just the excuse I was given? My dad and I had the discussion and came to the conclusion that it really doesn't matter. He's raised her every day of her life, she's his kid no matter what, so he opted not to stress her out by asking for a paternity test. And that's the story of why I can't ever get my sister one of those DNA test kits as a gift, even though I desperately want to, because doing that might open a door I can never close. My uncle committed identity theft on my grandfather so he could get a loan in order to secure farming equipment. He didn't tell my grandfather any of this and assumed the loan amount would just be taken out of my grandfather's will. Also, he has my cousins store their junk in my grandfather's spare garage. Well, we caught him, and to say we have him by the balls RN would be an understatement. We demanded he remove his kids' stuff from my grandfather's garage, we changed the locks on my grandfather's house, and installed cameras on the property so we can see if he goes onto the property. What's sad is we haven't told my grandfather about this because we believe he knew but allowed it to happen because he wanted to foster a relationship with him, because growing up they had a hard time really connecting, and since my grandfather is near the end of his life he wanted to be kind to him. And in case you're wondering how we did all that and how my grandfather doesn't know, he is currently living in an old person's home but is keeping the house as a place for my aunts and uncles to stay at when they go to visit him and my grandmother.